Hey CF, welcome back to Church on the Couch. I don't know about you guys, but between all this quarantine baking and the Mexican food we're apparently all craving and the cookies that we all had to make last week because Aaron ate cookies in front of us, somebody's gonna have to come roll us out the house when this is all over. That's all I know. We're so glad you guys are all here today. If you're new, welcome. We want to say hi, so comment new below so that we can connect with you after service. If you need prayer, type prayer, and if you have questions or want to make a decision, type connect, and we'll follow up with you after the service. This morning, we'll have a time of worship, a message from Aaron, and we'll take communion together, so grab your juice or crackers or whatever you've got on hand. I believe with all my heart that words and music can change the world. And I've noticed since we've been spending a little more time at home lately, we've been playing a lot more music in the house. So if you happen to drive by my house, you'll know it's us because the windows will be open and we'll be blasting the Beatles or happy acoustic music or show tunes or Sam's weird nerd rock. It's crazy how different your experience of being at home can be when your house is filled with music instead of silence or background TV or even podcasts. I think it's because God tuned our souls to feel things through music. It can be soothing, or it can get you hyped up, or it can make you cry. I think that's why we worship through music. Victor Hugo said, "Music expresses that which cannot be said and on which it is impossible to be silent." We worship through songs and through silence and through giving and quiet acts of service because our God is amazing and because of everything He's done for us. And as we do, we find ourselves re-centered and focused on what matters. So welcome to church. Let's worship together.
From the shackles, sing it from the chains, sing it from the trenches, sing it through the pain. There's a sun rising up, can you hear that freedom sound? Sing it from the shackles, we're gonna sing it loud, loud, loud. You're my deliverer, tear down the prison walls. My heart needs a miracle, you will come through. You're my deliverer, my anthem throughout it all. When my strength and my fight is gone, I know you will come through. Breaking off rejection, you're breaking off the chain, you're breaking off addictions, the power of your name. There's a sun rising up, can you hear the freedom sound? Sing it from the shackles, we're gonna sing loud, loud, loud. You're my deliverer, you tear down the prison walls. When my heart needs a miracle, you will come through. You're my deliverer, my anthem throughout it all. When my strength and my fight is gone, I know you will come through. Let the darkness hear our praises. From these ashes we'll see victory. Lanes are worthless, they can't hold us. From these shackles, show your glory. Let the darkness hear our praises. From these ashes, we'll see victory. Chains are worthless, can't hold us from these shackles. Show your glory. You're my deliverer. You tear down the prison walls. My heart needs a miracle. You will come through. You're my deliverer. My anthem throughout it all. When my strength and my might is gone, I know you will come through.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us for Church on the Couch. And if you're a guest, then we're really glad that you joined us today. My name is Aaron, and I'm the pastor at Christ Fellowship, and we are glad that we have this chance to gather together online today. It's moments like these that help push us as we seek something more for our lives. Now, truthfully, these can be some discouraging times. And over the past month, I have talked to a number of people who have just been frustrated or have been discouraged by something. Whether it's in the ministry and you're trying to lead a church through a pandemic, or whether it's just coping with being stuck at home, or frustrations with the government, or people being discouraged by the rhetoric of people on social media, or maybe you're trying to lose weight but you packed on the quarantine 15 instead. You know, maybe it's not being able to work or go to school or to be with your friends or to be with your family. It's easy to get discouraged. And now, I'll be honest, it hit me last Sunday. I think up to that point that I've been going nonstop. I've been busy. And last Sunday, I woke up and I was not excited about church. I wasn't excited it was Sunday, which never really happens for me. And I'll be honest, I was a little over it this season. I was discouraged. And now, it's okay. I'm okay. It didn't last long. Once our service started and I saw you guys engaging online, that encourages me. Now, if we sit long enough and if we focus on ourselves, we will end up being discouraged quickly. However, in the midst of all the crazy, we have so much encouraging news around us, and stories and people and careers. And I think it helps us to see the good, and we can see how blessed we are, even in the midst of the things going on around us. So, question for you today as we kick off. What is something encouraging that you've seen during this time? What's something encouraging you've seen during this time? Go ahead and think of that. Post that in the comments. If your kids are with you, make sure to get their answers as well and post them in the comments. But we need to see the good news too in the midst of all the bad news. Now, to kick it off, we have a number of healthcare workers in our church family and first responders and in our community, obviously. And I'm encouraged by their work and by their will and their sacrifice that they make day in, day out during this time. So what's some encouraging things that you've seen? I'm encouraged those in the church that continue to step up and help in uncertain times and help fill in the gaps. They help lead the way in loving God and encouraging those people around them. We need to constantly look for the encouraging news around us in times like these. Today we're in this series we're continuing is called Overcome. And we're looking at the life and trials of this guy named Joseph. And there's a lot of really good lessons that we learn about overcoming through looking at his life. And Joseph was from the family that was the foundation of the Jewish people. Joseph being the younger of many brothers, and he was his dad's favorite, kind of put him in a bind early on. His brothers tried to have him killed. Instead, they opted to sell him into slavery. He lands in Egypt as a servant. Now, his work and his reputation is marked by this phrase, "The Lord was with Joseph." Now, Joseph was gifted, he was blessed, and he was certainly, he made his way into a position of power only to repeatedly be seduced by his master's wife. Eventually, he was framed and blackmailed for something that he didn't even do. So Joseph saw adversity, and he would overcome. Joseph saw temptation, and he would overcome. And Joseph's story heads much in the same direction over and over and over. And as we're looking at today, we're talking about overcoming discouragement. Again, we can learn a lot about overcoming from Joseph. So we're going to pick up where we left off last week, and after he was blackmailed for trying to take advantage of his master's Potiphar's wife, Genesis 39, verse 20 through 23 goes like this. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. We saw this last week over and over again. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with him in whatever he did. Now, I'm not sure if he felt that God was with him always. Like, surely he felt uncomfortable, or he felt hot and hungry and abandoned, hurt, betrayed, slandered. And he continued to offer his best to his master Potiphar, only to be falsely accused and imprisoned. Picking up in Genesis 40, verse 1, he says, sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. Now, God can make anything good. We just need to trust him. Enter stage right, the cupbearer and the baker for Pharaoh, the king himself. These were two men on the personal staff of the king. Now, the cupbearer would have been the one who tasted the drink or the wine before Pharaoh did to ensure that it wasn't poisoned. Okay, fun job, right? And then the chief baker. So why are they in jail? We have no idea why they were in jail. Maybe they burnt the toast or spilled a little bit of the wine. Or maybe they were plotting to try out a gluten-free diet with Pharaoh and he wasn't going to have it. But we don't know. But God has a plan for this situation. And God does this thing all the time. And when we stop trusting him, we will always miss it. That people come into our life And that's one of God's biggest resources and greatest tool to work in our life is people. Too often we want God to help us win the lottery or to drop miracles in our lap, but probably his most common way that he works in our life is when he crosses our paths with other people. Picking up in verse 4, it says, after they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night. And each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, why do you look so sad today? We both had dreams, they answered, but there's no one to interpret them. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. Now, dreams are kind of a thing in Joseph's story. If you listened to 2 weeks ago, when Joseph was in his younger years, he was called a dreamer by his older brothers because he had a dream of how his family was going to, including his older brothers, were ultimately going to bow down to him, young Joseph, right? And it ended up getting him in trouble and sold off into slavery. So now, kind of a callback moment, dreams enter the picture again, Joseph's story. Isn't that something we see God do over and over again? He uses who we are and where we are, and he can create good out of it. Now, Joseph's ability to interpret dreams through God's wisdom, it comes back around full circle. Picking up in verse 9, it says, so the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, in my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. This is what it means, Joseph said to him. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of his prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. So how does Joseph know the meaning of this dream? Well, he answered it for you earlier when he told you interpretations belong to God. Joseph was used by God in a way outside of his own power, and God helped Joseph to interpret the dreams. Now, I don't know how this works, and I don't know how God decided to work through Joseph, but I think it shows us the kind of trust that Joseph was still giving to God. And this is good news for the cupbearer. If Joseph is in fact speaking from God, the cupbearer is going to be restored to his position. Now, not to be left out, hearing the good news given to the cupbearer, the baker is hearing this, and he's like, ooh, me next. And picking up in verse 16, it says, when the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Now, if that were me, if I were Joseph, and if I knew the interpretation of the baker's dream, I might have just told him, hey, come back in 4 days, then I'll tell you the meaning. But Joseph is straightforward, and the question is, will he be correct in this interpretation? Because that's the easiest way to find out if it's a fake. If they say something is going to happen and it doesn't happen. But God was with Joseph on this. Picking up in verse 20. says, now the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. Man, Joseph even delivered the bad news straight up. And it came to pass, just as he said. Not only did Joseph have some pretty important life-changing dreams, he also had the ability to interpret them. Now, check what happens next, verse 23. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Now, Joseph interpreted the cupbearer's dream, and he had one request back. If you would just remember me. I've already been mistreated, I've been enslaved, I've been falsely accused, and now I'm imprisoned. But the one thing you could do is, when you're free, mention me to Pharaoh. But Joseph was forgotten. Let me tell you, there's little more discouraging than being forgotten. I can imagine Joseph in this opportunity, seeing God's plan unfolding. I mean, he's interpreting dreams, and finally he's going to get help from the cupbearer, who's going to have the ear of the Pharaoh himself to get me out of this pit, to get me out of this dungeon. But doesn't this sound familiar? Maybe it's something that you planned, that it would play out a certain way. Maybe you worked hard, or you tried to help people along, but you're still in the same place that you've been for years and years. Discouragement can come in all kinds of ways. Now, this is 3 weeks in a row, as we looked at Joseph's life, that 3 chapters of the Bible in a row where the cliffhanger is a disappointment, where the cliffhanger is ultimately, it's just discouraging news. And so we don't really have a timeline here. We can't determine how long Joseph has been in prison up to this point and how long he's been in slavery away from home. But we do know in the very next verses that at least 2 years go by after the story. And the stinking cupbearer never says a word. He didn't remember Joseph. He forgot him for 2 years in prison. Now, we think 2 months is a long time in quarantine, right? Or under social distancing. But Joseph was in that mess for 2 years plus. So I want to ask you a question today. What does it take to discourage you? We talked about encouraging earlier, but what does it take to discourage you? Maybe you want to put that in the comments. Maybe you want to talk to whoever you're with, talk about it. Things may not be going as planned for you right now. Whether it's your schedule, maybe your family dynamics are all out of whack. You're just around each other all the time. Maybe it's your work. Maybe you're lonely. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe you're bored. Maybe your freedom. And it's easy to get discouraged. Now, Satan discourages us, and Satan uses discouragement because we become vulnerable during those times, and he wants to pick us off. And that's where he wants us. And it's why over and over and over in the Bible, we are told to encourage one another, to love one another, to spur one another on towards love and good deeds. But through it all, Joseph trusted God, even in a pit, and even in prison, even when he was forgotten. Now, that may be you today. So I want to wrap up today's message by looking at 2 keys to overcoming discouragement. And so the first one is this. When you are discouraged, keep doing your job. That's right. Keep doing your job. It doesn't sound like much of a key, does it, to overcoming anything, but it sounds more like a coach, doesn't it? Do your job. But good coaches do a good job at encouraging players past the point where they think that they can bear. And when the player is tired and their bodies are tired and their minds, they want to give up, when they don't think they have what it takes, an encouraging voice can help them get up one more time, to keep going one more time. You may be discouraged for a season, but seasons end and seasons change. And you need to remember that. Keep doing your job. As a follower of Christ, as a spouse, as a parent, as an employee, whatever it is you do, whatever you've been called to do, that's been placed on you in this season. I want to encourage you and challenge you to keep on going. Joseph could have thrown in the towel a long time ago. In fact, most of us would have if we were in Joseph's sandals, right? But Joseph stayed faithful. 1 Peter 2:20 was a letter that was written for times of trouble. And check this. It says, "But if you suffer for doing good and endure it patiently, God is pleased with you. For God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you." Now, God knows what we're going through, and He knows that we're going to be discouraged. He knows that there's going to be trials. He knows there's going to be suffering. And He calls us in the midst of it all to keep doing good, to keep the faith, to keep doing good, endure it patiently. And that's the path that Jesus took. Paul Harvey says, "A successful person is a person who gets up one more time than he gets knocked down." And I might add to that for today, say a successful person gets up one more day and does their best work, trusting in God, because the Lord is with you. So if you're on the brink of giving up, if you're on the brink of giving up the path that you need to be on in this season of your life, don't quit. Keep going. And the second key to overcoming discouragement that we're going to talk about today is this. When you are discouraged, look for others to encourage. When you're discouraged, look for others around you that you can encourage. Notice the wording in that phrase. It's not an accident. When you are discouraged, you look for someone else to encourage. Like, encourage them. And now I know that there are days that you need encouragement, but I can't guarantee that someone's always going to be there to encourage you. But when you look for the good, just as we need encouragement, so do those around you. Look for the good. And when you look for the good, you're going to see it's good for everyone. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 14 says this. It says, "And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive. Encourage the disheartened. Help the weak. Be patient with everyone." That phrase, encourage the disheartened. Disheartened means literally little spirited. Like, it's kind of like we're beat down, discouraged, like over it. You have little left, right, to give. Look for them. Encourage them. Why? Because the Lord is with you. Just as He was with Joseph so many years ago. And if you put your faith in Jesus, that's His promise. That He is with you. That's His promise. And that's an invitation for you today. If you've never put your faith in Jesus, that He wants to be with you. If you've never trusted in Him and confessed His name, been baptized into the name of Jesus, His invitation for you is to come. And if you have questions about that, or you want to put your trust in Jesus, I would love to connect with you. Just type "connect" in the comments, and we'd love to reach out with you and have a conversation about that. But today, as we close, I want to point you to a song by Need to Breathe. It's a song called "Wastelands." It came out a few years ago. And there's a line in the song that says, "In this wasteland where I'm living, there's a crack in the door filled with light. And it's all that I need to get by. Man, if that doesn't represent this season, like you may feel like you're in this wasteland. You may feel like you're surrounded by darkness, but you see a crack in the door and it's filled with light on the other side. Man, we have hope and we have peace. The song continues, the refrain, oh, if God is on my side, oh, if God is on my side. Yeah, if God's on my side, then who can be against me? And that's based on a promise from Romans chapter 8 that God is for us. That God works for the good for those who love him. That God is with you. God is for you. Keep doing your job. Keep doing good. Look for others to encourage around you. Right now, we're going to go into our time of communion. And if you have some bread or crackers and juice, you go ahead and get that ready. But this is a time where we celebrate this meal together, even if it is digitally, right? Where we celebrate and remember the death, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus. And when we're discouraged, we know that we can get through it because Jesus literally went through it all. So we can have peace with God. Check out 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21. It says, for God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin so that we could be made right with God through Christ Jesus. And if you're a believer, you're invited to join us during this time as we celebrate. I'm going to give you a minute to reflect and to pray. Then I'm going to pray, and then we'll take the bread and the juice together. God, thank you for this time together and for your scriptures, your word, God, that speak to us. And God, right now, I just pray a special prayer for anyone right now who's feeling discouraged, whether it's things they have no control over, whether it's over the season that we're in right now, or whether it's something completely different. That God, that we can first and foremost find our peace and our hope in you. A light in the crack of a door, God. And we're going to continue to be people that are going towards the light, towards your goodness, towards your love for us and your truth. God, thank you for Jesus and through the cross and through the raising from the dead, that you conquer all evil, you conquered sin, you conquered death. And so right now, God, we just declare that we are people of hope. God, use us to encourage the people around us. And God, I pray that you will encourage us through your Spirit, through your word, and through the people around us, that we can be encouraged in you today. That's all in the name of Jesus I pray. Amen.
You are not hidden. There's never been a moment you were forgotten. You are not hopeless. Though you have been broken, your innocence stolen. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS. And I will send down an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. true, I will rescue you. There is no distance that cannot be covered over and over. You're not defenseless. I'll be your shelter, I'll be your armor. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS. And I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true, I will rescue you. And I will never stop marching to reach you in the middle of the hardest fight. It's true, I will rescue you. I hear the whisper underneath your breath. I hear you whisper you have nothing left. And I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true, I will rescue you. And I will never stop marching to reach you in the middle of the hardest fight. It's true, I will rescue you. Oh, I will rescue you.
One of the ways we worship is through giving. Remember in the Christmas story when Jesus was born and the wise men brought him gifts, like super impractical but really expensive baby gifts? They were worth probably more than everything Jesus' parents had put together. And I always thought it was kind of a cool contrast with a story that happened later in Jesus' life, when he watched a poor widow put 2 tiny coins in the offering basket, and he told his friends, "This poor widow has given more than all the rest of them, for they've given a tiny part of their surplus, but she, as poor as she is, has given everything she has." Whether you have a lot or a little, Jesus doesn't care about what you give, but how. The heart behind the giving is what matters. And that's why it's an act of worship. You can give online at cfsforlovers.info. We are still giving out quarantine boxes. If you or someone you know needs one, let us know. We love seeing all of the silly scavenger hunt pictures from our CF kids this week. Be sure to check out our CF Kids Facebook page for another fun challenge this week, and take a few minutes for Kids Church online after this. Our CF students are meeting virtually every Wednesday, so check out the CF Students Instagram and Facebook page for details. Don't forget to comment below if you're new or if you need prayer or want to connect, and also leave us a comment with your key takeaway from this morning. We'll see you back here on the couch next Sunday. CF is for lovers.
Okay, I can do a little better. Little better. Little better, little better. It's my vocal warm-up.